What do we want? Real democracy! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Real democracy! When do we want it? Now!
Welcome to Real Democracy Now. I'm Deijk Thompson, and Real Democracy Now is a podcast for people who think we can and should improve how democracy works. This podcast looks at democracy from different angles to help you think about how democracy might be improved. Welcome to episode 15 of season 1 of Real Democracy Now, a podcast. In today's episode, I talked to Harm van Deijk, one of the founders of the G1000 in the Netherlands, about how the G1000 has evolved. Harm gives a fascinating and detailed account of how the G1000 one-day events are facilitated. As in Belgium, the G1000 in the Netherlands is focused on agenda setting. Welcome to the show, Harm. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Can you describe how the initial G1000 was designed and why it was designed that way?
Yes, I did quite some study into the way people in Belgium did it, to learn from them and to develop from there. What I learned was that they had a kind of inquiry beforehand for all Belgian people who wanted to join in. They did it by internet, and by doing so, they gathered a lot of ideas and themes which should be discussed at the G1000. What they did was appointing a panel of people. I don't know what kind of background they had, but they made a selection. They compressed all the ideas into 3 themes. And these themes were leading during the day. They were the agenda for the initial G1000. Now, they had about 730 people from all around Belgium. They were mostly selected by sortition. This is quite a new phenomenon which we adopted as well. And the people were in the room sitting at tables of 10. Every table had a table secretary who made notes and who was leading the discussion at the tables. And during the day, the 10 people at the table got to know each other and talked about all 3 themes for about 2 hours. At the end of the discussion of 2 hours, they got their results to a central place in the room, and there were people making summarizing all the results of the tables. And by doing so, they had, at the end of the day, they had an overview of everything which was said in the room. And this result they presented to some of the politicians who were struggling to get a new government. 32 people of the 730 were asked to come back some weeks later to discuss the results and to summarize them further and make a kind of manifesto which was again presented to the local government. So this is the way the initial Belgian G1000 worked. And if you look into the design, you see that it was pointed at creating material which could directly be used by the government and the political parties. So input for policy. This is a very important characteristic of this first G1000.
And do you know, did the politicians take the ideas coming out of the G1000 in Belgium on board and actually do anything with it?
As far as we can see now, they didn't. So this was quite a disappointing thing of the G1000 in Belgium, that in the end, nobody was owner of the results of the G1000. And this led to us to the conclusion to make a completely new design for the G1000, where ownership of the results was the central issue.
What was the motivation for taking the G1000 beyond Belgium?
Well, this was a very personal motivation because in 2013, I was, as an Amersfoort citizen, Amersfoort, the city where I live, I saw David van Rijbroek on television. David van Rijbroek was one of the people from Belgium who was involved in organizing the first G1000 there. And he's also a writer and an historian and a philosopher and a committed Democrat. And he presented in 2013 on television his new booklet, Against Elections. I think maybe it has been published in Australia as well.
Yes, it has just recently.
Exactly. Now, he is the man who brought the idea of a G1000 and the sortition all over Europe. He's a very charming man. He talks almost poetically. If you hear him talk, you almost are convinced before even noticing what he's talking about. But apart from that, I was very struck by the idea of 1,000 people in the room, 1,000 citizens selected by sortition, ordinary citizens who take up their own community, the future of their own community, who take this future in their own hands. And because I'm working in the field of groups, facilitation and moderation, I could easily understand, on one hand, what the difficulty would be, but on the other hand, what the possibilities would be of having such a big group of citizens in the room. And I was so enthusiastic that I said to myself, okay, Harm, if you're so enthusiastic and you like this to happen, let's do it yourself. So there I started organizing with some volunteers of Amersfoort, a growing group of enthusiasts. And in a period of 3 months, we succeeded in organizing the first G1000 on a local level in Amersfoort. And when we did so, people who were involved in it and people of the Netherlands who saw us doing it were so enthusiastic that we were called upon from all over the country to come and to present the idea and the way we worked. And from there on, we decided to start the platform G1000 now. And this platform is now supporting all kinds of initiators all around citizens, all around the Netherlands, to help them organize this G1000, which is quite an enterprise. It's quite an enterprise to organize such a day with 1,000 people in the room, campaigning to get them there, doing the selection, trying to convince government to listen to what they are saying, having the employers in the room to support what's happening there. This is, for an ordinary citizen or a group of citizens, this is a huge enterprise. So we said, if we want this to happen, this G1000, in every council in Holland, we have to help the people who take the initiative to make it happen. And at the same time, we have to talk to the government and to all kinds of people in Holland to convince them this is a really good new way of democracy. So there it started, and we are now, after 2 years, we succeeded in helping 13 G1000s organized in Holland and still growing. There is a movement of mayors and all kinds of people from within the system who feel the urgency of change. This movement, Code Orange, was launched not long ago, some weeks ago, and we are working quite strongly with them. We from outside the system, they from inside the system. So you see on all parts that things are moving now in Holland. And the latest development, as you noted, is that we were asked to come over to Cambridge, to England and to London. And they were so enthusiastic about our approach that they asked us to help them organize the G1000 Cambridge in spring 2017. So we are very lucky to have that.
As I mentioned before, Graham Smith, in a recent interview I did with him for the podcast, He spoke about how the G1000 had evolved since that original process in Belgium in 2010, which was focused totally on citizens being involved. The 1,000 people were citizens. And you've touched on the fact that you're now engaging a broader range of people, such as employers and so on. Can you tell us a little bit about how the process has evolved in the Netherlands, from the version that first happened?
What I already told was that the aim of the G1000 in Belgium was mostly on creating content which could be used directly for policy making and for the political parties. But when you put 1,000 people in the room together and you give them the opportunity to talk with each other, the most important thing that happens is that they get related to each other. So you start a process of community building. This is why I was so enthusiastic about the idea of 1,000 people in the room. I saw a huge opportunity of creating, well, not a new community, but taking a part of the community which is selected by sortition and let them talk about and let them feel again what is really important for them for their own community. So when they come out of the room after a day, they can feel strong again about their being part of the community where they live and about what should be done and what should happen to take care of this community. So this community thing is the most important, from our point of view, is the most important result of a G1000 and also the most important aim. What happens when you get this focus, you come to a complete different program for the day. The program should then be to support the idea of the citizen, the persons who are taking part in the event, as persons who are autonomous, who are standing on their own feet, are totally capable of making their own decisions and leading themselves through the program of the day, through the ideas at hand, and taking conclusions from themselves. Now, this is quite an abstract idea, which I formulate now, so I get a little bit more practical. What we do is that we say, first of all, the G1000 should be organized by citizens. But it shouldn't be only citizens who are taking part in it. The whole system should be in the room. This is basically an open space idea, and the reason why is that if we want a renewal of our communities and a renewal of our democracies and a renewal of the way we are working together, we shouldn't exclude anyone of the community out of it. So it's quite important to have not only citizens in the room, but also the other two major stakeholders of any community, and these are the employers on one hand, business-like and non-profit as well, and of course the government, who basically has the role of governing the continuity of the community. So what we did was, from 1,000 people, we said, well, let's select 600 citizens by sortition, let's select 100 employers from our networks, and let us select 100 government people, half politicians and half civil servants, on the other hand. And so then we have 800 people. Then we have 200 places left. And these 200 places, 100 we reserve for what we call free thinkers. These are people who can shake up the discussion and the deliberation at the table when it's a little bit too routinious. And then we have specially trained table secretaries who are trained not to lead the conversation. So basically we tell them things which they won't be doing, and besides of that we learn them how to make notes on a television screen in front, in view of all the participants. So there we have 10 people at the table then, and if we have this 10 people at the table, we have a small print of the dynamics of the whole of the community. And we ask these 10 people in the afternoon program to work on a theme which they choose themselves out of a list of 10 out of the agenda. And this list of 10 is not created like Belgium the first time beforehand, before the event, but this list of 10 agenda items is the result of a group's dialogue in the morning program. So, and this is basically another part of one of the leading principles of our G1000, where we have ownership of the results as the most important aim of the day. We say it's most important that participants lead themselves. So this principle makes that we can't draw an agenda beforehand. So the principle of participants leading themselves has a lot of consequences for the day. They are invited to talk about a subject. So the subject is put forward by us, by the organization, or by the sponsor of the event of the G1000. But when you're in the room, there is nobody who's going to tell you where to talk about, or what to select, or where to be. We ask with the first question on all the people in the room, what do you think is important about the subject you are invited for? Until now, the G1000 has only one subject, and that is the future of your own community. But it is well thinkable for us that we take up a certain issue which is at hand in this community, like traffic or care or sustainability or anything. The principle, the way of working stays the same. So there is a subject, you are invited, you come in the room, and the first question is, what do you think is important? And then, in the morning program, you're seated with 4 people on a small table, like as if you are in the cafe or in the bar, and you start talking about that. And after 20 minutes, we break up the dialogue and we ask people to think about what struck them in the dialogue, what they remembered, what they think is important, and to give us back this in one word. And then they change table and they encounter 3 other people and they start talking about the second question, which is about, so what should happen in your opinion? And this goes the same, 20 minutes, 4 people talking about anything. We break up after 20 minutes and we ask them, give us a word. What did struck you? And they go to another table, and what you see is a huge difference with the first G1000. When you're in the G1000, the way we do it now, you encounter all kinds of people in the room. You meet the diversity of the community, you hear people, and one of the rules we give the people is don't go into discussion, so avoid discussion. So there is no need to try to get an agreement with each other, so there is no reason to discuss or to try to convince the other that you are right. So just listen and do with the things you hear what you want. We think real dialogue is about that. Now, after 3 rounds, we have theoretically, with 1,000 people in the room, we have 3,000 words. And we present them directly. We developed some software for that. We present this 3,000 words in a word cloud to the people in the room. And what they see there on the screens is a word cloud with some words very large and a lot of words very small. The large words are the words which are most frequently used by the people gathered. And we ask them, is it correct that this is the agenda you want to talk about? And almost always the room participants agrees directly that this 10 words or 7 words or 8 words represent all the things they think are important for the community to work on. Of course, they have a whole morning of ideas with them, and they take these ideas to the afternoon program, and they choose to talk about one of the themes from the morning program.
Can I just ask, Harm, the morning one, you've got that technology, but in a sense it sounds a little bit like it's styled on a World Cafe.
It's exactly the World Cafe.
Yes,
so I didn't know, it is the World Cafe in its most original form. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of diversions from the original idea, but I use the World Cafe in its most original form, and to get the results out of the World Cafe, I use this word cloud. Yeah, this is interesting because it gives you direct feedback of the results, and it's a very nice way of speeding up the program. So we can decide directly after the World Cafe, we can decide with the whole room about the results and how to go on, how to move on. And this gives a huge idea of ownership in the room. So the room sees the things they talk about, they see them directly on the screen, and they can choose themselves with which things to go on. So what we do is we take when we decide with the room upon the agenda for the rest of the process, and this is basically 7 to 10 words or themes, we have divided the room in 10 what we call blocks of 10 tables. So at the end of the morning program, the participants rebuild the room to make it ready for the afternoon program. And when they rebuild it, they have made tables of 10 to invite 10 people together with a television screen. And every block of 10 of these tables has one of the themes connected to it. And then the participants are free to move around and to go to the table and to the theme where they want to talk the rest of the day. And in the afternoon program, they search for their own table, their own table mates, and they sit in one table for the rest of the day with 9 other people. What we try to do is to get a diversity, as much diversity at the table as we can. So we gave all participants a badge, and on the badge are 2 colors. One color is defining what stakeholder they are, and the other color is defining which geographical location they come from. And what we simply say to all people is in the room is, well, look around you and talk with as much different colors on the table as you can. So again, also in this aspect, they lead themselves. We do no selection ourselves. It's all self-organized. We give, basically what we do, we give a structure for the room and a structure for the day program, so that they can be certain that there will be reached a result at the end of the day at 3:30. But we let them free to go move through this structure by themselves. And what we especially don't do is we avoid any, we stay out of, we are not leaving the discussion at any weight. So there they are free. Now, okay, so we have an afternoon program. The people go through it at tables of 10, and they work the theme. From the theme, they work in 2 or 3 steps to a presentation of the idea of that table. And this idea, this presentation they make with help of the table secretary, is presented on the television screen in a small, you could say, moving presentation, a small film. And yeah, we use the program Prezi. The table secretaries are trained to use that program. Now, when the people come into the G1000, or also a new development we made this year, is they get a badge, and in the badge there is an RFID chip. And on this chip we can put on votes. So they get 4 votes, all of them. And at the end of the afternoon program, we remove all the furniture out of the room, except the television screens. So people can move around as freely as they want and look to all the different proposals which are made by this working group. And if they like a proposal or they think it's important, they can, with their badge, they can bring out a vote to it. And these votes are directly got together, and we have a direct presentation of the results on the screen of the floor manager. And at any time we want, we can show the results to the room. Now, we found it's better to wait until the voting is finished. Otherwise, you get all kinds of strange dynamics in the room. And
yes, I've seen that.
After the voting is completed, we show the top 10 of the proposals the room thinks are the most important to work on further. So the people in the room not only make proposals, but they also vote in the end on what are the most fruitful ideas to work on after the G1000. Now, this is not really the end. It's almost the end. Because then comes an important moment where I present the results to the room and I say to them, well, you've talked today now about what you think is important, but outside the room there is no one who is going to realize these ideas. So if you want them to happen, you have to adopt them yourselves and you have to work on them yourselves. So who is ready to adopt one of the ideas of the top 10 and to work with them together with the others to realize them? And then about 1/3 of the people in the room, so basically between 200 and 300 people, decide at that moment spontaneously to adopt one of these projects of the top 10 and to gather again 3 weeks later in the room to decide together how to realize them and how to work with them. And these groups of people basically are citizens, but there are also employers, and there are also politicians and also civil servants who are choosing to adopt one of these projects and to work together with them to realize these ideas. So this is a very, well, there you see the ownership which is established during the day, and we see all over Holland, we see quite some remarkable results coming forward from that.
This is quite different to a lot of other deliberative processes that I've been talking to people about, which have been more either academic or government-led processes. How does the councils, because you said that these are run at local government level, how have the councils been, as well as participating on the processes, how have they responded to the recommendations and the other things coming out of the G1000 meetings?
Yeah, this is quite an issue. The idea of a G1000 was quite threatening for the politicians in the city councils. So we saw them hesitating, should we take part or shouldn't we take part, and what should we do? After, in Amersfoort, we had 2 G1000s now, so this spring we had the second one, and what we see is that there is a sense of neglect in the city council. They don't understand they don't understand what we are doing. They sense that they should be there, they should be in the room, some of them, but it is so different of what they are doing that they do not always recognize the importance. So when I'm talking to some of the politicians, they are quite skeptic because they say, oh, but there are no decisions made and we don't see any effect of it. And the most peculiar thing was that 2-3 weeks ago, there was an interview with his Labour Party leader in a local newspaper, and he presented there the idea of neighborhood councils, which are for which the people should be selected by sortition. And the interviewer asked him, so how does this idea work together with the G1000? And he said, he is one of the skeptics, he said, the G1000, there never comes a result out of it. But he didn't realize that the idea for the neighborhood councils came directly out of a group of people who were working together since the first G1000. So
that's so funny, isn't it?
It was very funny to see this and to hear this. So, and you see how the G1000 works. It works not directly on the decision-making process. It works on the process of agenda making. And this is something which is often forgotten by people who are working on democratic renewal. They tend to lay an emphasis on the decision making. And of course, it's important to look into these procedures of decision making and to make them more open and more transparent, etc. But the real things of the power things are happening in the process of agenda setting. There is where the lobbyists are. There is where people are trying to get their idea up front. And there, no citizen is until now, until the G1000, in this process of agenda setting, there weren't any citizens involved other than the citizens' lobbyists. So I think we struck a huge thing by organizing the G1000 and trying to get ideas, trying to get projects, proposals from the whole of the community instead of just the winning coalition, and to ask them for the ideas, what is important for the community, and to let them give directions to go. And almost, I would say automatically, these themes come forward within programs of political parties, within decision making, but also where the employers are coming together when they have been in a G1000 and they have listened to each other and to the citizens. It's almost impossible not to take into account what you have heard there and to work with it.
One of the things I certainly have noticed in all the deliberative mini-public type processes and that I've looked at is the lack of agenda setting by citizens. The agenda is always set by someone else. And so I think that's just
exactly
a really interesting model, because I've thought before about, well, how can you give citizens an agenda setting role? How can you do that? And so that's, it's a nice model to actually achieve that. Although it's obviously sometimes people don't actually realise that the citizens are setting the agenda.
Yeah, maybe we should aim at that. But basically, you are right. There are two characteristics at the G1000. One, this is about real ownership of the citizen over its own community. So I think this is more democratic. You can't have it when citizens really are allowed to define their own agenda and work with it. And secondly, this is the problem of scale. When you look into deliberative mini-publics, you already hear the word mini-public, there is always the problem of scale. And I think we tackled the problem of scale. We can do this with any number of people in the room.
Well, it's an amazing number of people, 1,000 people in a room, to get through that agenda that you've got for them.
And we can do it with 2,000 and 3,000 as well. So this is only a problem of logistics, but the software and the way of working we do, we can use as many people as are interested or are relevant for the subject at hand. So I think we reached a very important obstruction there.
That issue about, I suppose, scale, you've said that in the G1000s that you run in Holland, there's 600 citizens selected by sortition. Can you tell me a little bit about how you go about getting those citizens? And do you stratify to get different ages and so on, or is the size, the scale, does that deliver that? 600 citizens volunteering to spend a day and then selected by sortition so that it's not all the volunteers. It just seems an amazing process to me. How does that work?
What we do is we go to the city council and ask them to select from the citizen administration 10,000 people by sortition. So basically, the sortition is done by the city council. And then we invite these 10,000 people who are randomly selected and who are representing all the different demographic groups, who are a representative group of the whole of the community. We invite them to come into the room. After this first invitation, about 2 to 3% of the people invited react to it. So then we have about 200 to 300 people who are, how do you call it?
Volunteered.
Yeah, who they get a code and they have to go to a website and to fill in the code, and then they participate, or they have told us they wanted. Then we send the second invitation, a reminder, which looks totally different from the first one. And then we get again 300 people who register. And with these people, we have almost 600 done. And with these 600 people, we do the day. So this is how it basically works. It's a process of, until now, it's a process of self-selection. Yes. So certain people are not coming into the room. We do no stratification until now. But by doing that, we are vulnerable for skeptics who say, you're not, the people in the room are not representative because they are higher educated than normal, they are a little bit older than normal, and there are no ethnic minorities in the room. And this is true. So we do a lot of investigation, we do a lot of research. Every G1000 people are asked, and we are looking to who is in the room, etc. So we have a lot of data, and from there we are step by step trying to develop the model so that we can have a representative group in the room. But this always will depend on the subject at hand. If we talk about the future of the community, there is a certain part of the community who is interested in that. But if we talk about care or about fugitives, there will be a lot of other people in the room. So, yes, we are going to tackle a certain part of the idea, mostly because people get to know the idea of the G1000. They have to get to know that it is not the government who's organizing it. There is a lot of skepticism, distrust to the government in Holland. So we have to show them, no, it's not the government. It's really about yourself. And then we hope to see that the group who is reacting on the invitation will grow. But in the end, if we want to have a real representative sample in the room, we have to use stratification, and to do that, we will have to invite a lot more people to make that happen.
Yes, that's right. One thing that we've done, I've been involved in recruiting, much smaller deliberative mini-publics here in Australia. One of the things we do, particularly to get young people, is we supplement the mail out to residents, if you like, with some invitations sent out randomly through local universities and colleges. And that way we can bolster our younger youth numbers, because that's always our hardest area to get, is the younger people. So.
Oh, no, what we see is that the younger people come in if we have young people in the campaigning group. So what we saw now was we have to have the groups we want in the room, we have to have them in the campaigning group. Maybe because of their networks, maybe because of their ideas, or maybe because of strategies, I don't know. But if we do so, we get these groups in the room as well, without leaving the sortition.
That makes sense. And there's obviously a lot of resources required to run one of these G1000s.
Yeah,
you know, there's the mail
exactly.
out of the invitations, there's the hire of the venue, all of that, your table facilitators. How are these things resourced?
Basically, the group of citizens, the local group, has to organize them themselves. They have to find resources with their local community, with their city council, for instance, for sending the invitations, or the venue, sponsoring, catering from here or there. So they have to search a lot by themselves, and then for doing the program during the day, the workshops, the trainings, the moderation, all the technicians, etc., we supply. So we have some resources gotten from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We have some funding from other parts, and so we are capable to do a lot of the technical production. We can pay for and support with that the local initiatives. But of course, it's a huge enterprise. It costs a lot of. If you have to pay for it, it costs a lot of money. And people, when you start with zero, so you have to get it from all parts of the city. Yeah.
Yes, I can see that. To date, has it mainly been at a local council level, so that in terms of that, looking at the future of our area, the area has been localised?
This is interesting. Just 2 weeks ago, for the first time, we had a regional one in Friesland, which is a county of Holland, a province, and this was very successful. We had them from a large area, all people from small villages coming together, which was basically a Friesland small city or small village G1000. And interesting to see that people come for that as well. Then we had, because we developed this way of working, we are asked by non-profit organizations to organize a summit for them as well. We don't call that a G1000, but we use the G1000 program for that. And we did one for the biological sector, the biofood, with farmers from all over the country, with consumers, with shop owners from all over the country. So this was, in a way, a first national G1000. We called it the Bio 1000. And this worked as well. So we are basically convinced that you can do this way of working. The G1000 is basically an instrument which you can use at any scale. The only thing you need is there has to be an urgency, a reason for people to come into the room and to spend a day talking about the subject at hand. So if you have that, and you have the people in the room who are attached to this urgency, you can have a G1000, you can use this way at any scale.
Really amazing. It sounds like an incredible design, and obviously it's developed, I imagine, over the time from when you first used it in Amersfoort, and as you've moved on, you've finessed it a bit, have you? Well,
basically, the design comes from 2005. I developed it during my career as moderator. It started with the World Café, which is such a very fine example of facilitating dialogue. And from this World Café, I developed this whole day program because I wanted to establish the ownership in a very concrete way. So this is how the program developed. And yes, the past 3 years, we did a lot of development of tools to make the program happen. And we are still working with universities, with research, with data gathering to get the program, and especially the process after the G1000 to improve it step by step. so that it gets a maximum impact on and for the people who are involved.
Thank you so much for talking to me. It's fascinating to hear how that process has evolved. Thank you for joining me to learn more about the G1000, this time in the Netherlands. In next week's episode, I'll be talking to Professor James Fishkin about his life's work, deliberative polling. I hope you'll join me then. Thanks for listening to Real Democracy Now! You can find more about today's topic in the show notes at www.realdemocracynow.com.au. If you enjoyed this program, please subscribe to this podcast, write a review, share the podcast with your friends, and join the conversation on the webpage or on Facebook or Twitter. I'd love to know what you think is the essence of a real democracy.